Thank you so much, Susanna. Good afternoon, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. I've heard a lot of optimism about global trade and a lot of optimism about Dubai. Both are very, very well founded. Let me reinforce those arguments in my presentation today, but also raise some of the mega trends that we need to be aware of as we plan the future of the global logistics industry. I want to start with the point that Susanna just mentioned at the beginning, this word fragmentation. It's come up obviously a fair bit today. What does it mean? A lot of people portray the world as fragmenting into hostile Cold War-like camps in the geopolitical domain. That may or may not happen. What I want to point to is a scenario that is already becoming real. I call it continental drift. What I mean by that is that already over the past decade or more, really since the global financial crisis, certainly since the election of Donald Trump, well, his first election, and since COVID, we've seen acceleration of the regionalization of the world economy, particularly around the three core economic zones, North America, Europe, and Asia. And it's not reliant on any one of those single factors, but all of them cumulatively that we have now begun, I think, a slide into a world where these three zones are committing ever more resources towards their internal integration with each other, potentially at the expense of their global interdependencies. So if you look closely here, the United States already trades more with Canada and with Mexico each than it does with China, for example. And that trend is likely to accelerate with the entire nearshoring phenomena and the complementarities in land, labor, capital resources that exist in the North American domain. Europe too, although there's a lot of skepticism or at least doubts about the growth potential of Europe moving forward, and it already is the most integrated region of the world economy, it has been looking at what others have been doing and realizing that its industrial policy also has to focus very much on, call it the Green New Deal, for example, and other forms of further integrating Europe's dependency in energy markets and finance, banking, and technology and other areas to achieve what President Macron of France likes to call strategic autonomy. And then, of course, there's Asia, which has been rightly center stage in discussions today. And we shouldn't forget that Asia already trades more internally than it does with the rest of the world. There is a growing drift, again, happening by which Asia, with China obviously as a key anchor, has begun to build the institutional arrangements like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is by far the largest regional trade zone in the world over the last several years. And note that COVID, the time when we started to really take seriously the idea that there would be an accelerated deglobalization, was the time when all three of these regions began to double down on their intra-regional cooperation. So I think this is one of the mega trends which, despite all the uncertainty and volatility in the world today, we can be fairly certain that over the next 3, 5, 10 years, this is going to remain a world of this regional continental drift. And yet, at the same time, as has been rightly emphasized today, it's still a world of rising connectivity. This is an industry that is the great enabler of that connectivity, not just between regions or nations, but of course, cities. Cities remain the crucial anchors and drivers of the world economy. The world is still urbanizing. You may remember as well those conversations during COVID when some people posited that why do we need to live in cities anymore? We can, all do remote work and go live in some countryside somewhere. Well, that's not what actually happened, of course, right? Humankind is literally an urban species. We have a desire to connect and to be among ourselves. And so I imagine in the coming decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, we will actually reach the point where 80 to 90% of the human population is actually going to live in major cities. And the networks among them continue to flourish. You can look undersea at internet cables that are being laid down. You can look in the sky at airline connections. You can look digitally or financially at stock exchanges merging. All of those things continue at a robust pace. And of course, it is cities like Dubai that sit very much at the center of this map. Now, what's important here is that when we hear the word fragmentation, we again think of the world as a zero-sum competition. I want to be clear that that is not how cities view the world, right? Cities don't measure their own economies only by the transactions and the number of people and the businesses within their municipal area. They also measure their value by the extent to which they are connected to others through logistics networks, trade, and so forth. It is part of the economy of Dubai to be literally the single most connected city physically in the entire world. How would you strip away the value of all of the connections, all of the people, all of the circulation when you're measuring the value of a place like Dubai? You can't. And the same is true of many, many other cities in the world today. So let's be clear that when people use the word fragmentation, always correct it. Always remind that there is a certain degree of connectivity that is not only built into the world today, but seems to continue to expand and enhance despite the regional clusters I mentioned earlier. Now, all of these investments are going to require a lot more infrastructure. And I think that to some degree is music to people's ears here. And you hear about a global capex boom in the world today across three major pillars, two of which we'll talk about right now, but transportation, energy, and communications, or digital. So when it comes to transportation, of course, we have this sector. We have freight, we have anything related to highways, and it is, and obviously aviation, shipping, all of which contribute to, regionally, to that industrial policy, nearshoring paradigm that I was talking about earlier. But also in particular, just remember that it is also a bridge across regions. Think about Europe and Asia getting more connected through the Belt and Road Initiative, for example. This region, West Asia, and its connections to Central Asia and East Asia, which I'll talk about more in a minute. And of course, all of the additional investments in infrastructure that are needed in some of the emerging markets, ascending markets, high growth markets like India. And of course, all of this requires energy. And energy not only in the sense of the baseload power that we need that comes from our traditional energy sources, but also, of course, alternatives and renewables. Think in particular about the role of gas and gas prices being so widely divergent around the world and the need to invest in that capacity, infrastructure, and redundancy, bear in mind, given geopolitical shocks, to ensure that we have stable energy supplies around the world. And now also, of course, alternatives and renewables. All of this is happening and is going to continue to happen as the world urbanizes, as emerging markets grow, and as we have more global connectivity and trade. And all of that is happening, I used the phrase Belt and Road briefly earlier, particularly in this triangular zone of what used to be called centuries ago, or what we now use as a term to describe the world of centuries ago, Afro-Eurasia. Africa, Europe, Asia. And what better place to be talking about where those three regions, continents, zones intersect than here in the UAE, here in Dubai. And prior to the colonial era, so we are literally going back 500-600 years, ever so briefly, this was the world. Of course, this was the world. And here you're talking about a region, whether it is the terrestrial corridors across Eurasia or the maritime corridors across the Indian Ocean, that literally represent the majority of the world population, majority of world trade, majority of infrastructure investment, and of course, therefore, the key new shipping, logistics, transit, freight corridors that are emerging in the world today. So I'd be very optimistic about this. And I want to go geometric in one more slide here to talk about a specific triangle, which isn't often paid attention to. But within this vast Afro-Eurasian zone, we also have the, again, emerging regions that are really driving growth and have the highest upside potential in the coming decade and beyond. And I'm, of course, talking about one corner of the triangle being right here in the Gulf, another corner being Southeast Asia, the ASEAN countries, and the top of the triangle being the Central Asian region, CAR. So I give the three acronyms here, GCC, CAR, ASEAN. And these, to me, are among the highest potential. Now, why is it important to look at the world and this zone of the world in this way. Because we tend to have, of course, a US-centric or a China-centric or even India-centric view of where the growth is going to be. And I'm giving you a different flavor on it. Of course, China is a superpower and an anchor of the world economy. Of course, India is the world's fastest growing large economy and is going to continue to be perhaps for another decade. But when you are looking for where is next, beyond the obvious, look for the emerging regions that still have room to grow and note that they are building more connections to each other. Get on a plane from here to Singapore, or from here to Almaty, or from Singapore to Almaty, and see what I'm talking about. Then go to the countries and look at what their infrastructure plans are. Who do they want to connect to? Who are their fastest growing new trade partners? And you will see that in addition to the anchors, the pillars of the Asian growth story that you already know, new ones are literally unfolding and have at least a decade, 2 decades or more to go before they reach their potential. Think about the young demographics. Think about the infrastructure investment. Think about the modernization plans. All of these things are very exciting in these regions that should by no means be neglected. Far from it. They should already be front and center in your strategies. Now, more broadly, kind of focusing on the actual just Asian region. Here we are in the West Asian quadrant in the Gulf. You have South Asia, Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, Central Asia, and what geographers call North Asia, which is another way of saying Russia, all on one map. And bear in mind, this is literally most of the human population. Right? Most of the 8.5 billion human beings alive live just inside this rectangle. Right? Leave aside the whole rest of the world. So don't worry, we're not forgotten. Here we are. We're on this map. And this represents, within that broader Afro-Eurasian system, the lion's share of the world's infrastructure investments, because we're only 3 decades into this process that really accelerated with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, by which Asia is Asianizing, as I like to say, by which the different subregions of Asia, all the compass directions, are starting to stitch themselves back together again. And despite the geopolitical tensions that obviously exist between many countries on this map, you nonetheless have many institutions, not only bilaterally, but now regional institutions, whether it is the AIIB, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Belt and Road Initiative generally. You just had the BRICS Summit, of course, take place a couple of weeks ago in Russia, where many of the countries on this map were very enthusiastic participants, in which, in fact, a whole raft of new measures related to infrastructure, trade finance, reinsurance, currency clearing and settlement, and so forth, were all ratified. And those are going to be the institutional mechanisms by which frictions are reduced, trade is enabled, and more of these corridors that I've pointed to on the other maps are going to unfold. But the ones you see here, whether it is the high-speed railways, the gas pipelines, electricity grids, even ultra-high voltage transmission lines, all of these things that are being developed and planned are happening here. And they haven't all happened yet. And remember that when you're pessimistic about an economy because of its demographics or because of the debt or other headwinds, remember that that is the time at which they will focus more on external connectivity, on exports, on trade relations in order to find ways to grow. That's precisely, of course, what China is doing right now, for example. So now we have to factor in some more things that are going to be game changers, obviously not all for the better. And one of them is climate change. The COP summit is still underway in Baku. The last COP summit, COP28, was here in Dubai. And as we probably all know, the efforts that are being made to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions or to reduce emissions are not sufficient to counter rising global temperatures, among other negative aspects of climate change and climate volatility that are unfolding. And that's going to have, and is having, significant chain reactions worldwide. And so not only do we have to continue to invest in decarbonization and net zero across industries, but we also have to think a lot more realistically, pragmatically, and immediately about adaptation. Right? What are the things that we need to do to prevent the worst consequences in societies, because the number of people worldwide that are exposed to heat, to heat stress, flood, fire, drought, sea level rise, is growing. And so what this map does, this is called the suitability index. What it shows in a color-coded scheme from green to red is the change in the livability of a place over time as temperatures do rise. And it does focus on temperature primarily. And a red area is one in which it is decreasingly suitable versus its previous status. And green means more suitable. Now, note the really paradoxical or perverse, you might even say, rather, irony of what's going on here. The most populous region of the entire world is South Asia, by far, right? If you take India, Pakistan, Bangladesh together, you've got 1.8 or so billion people, and the entire area is red. We've been hearing about the heat waves, also the pollution, all of which are linked in some way, shape, or form to climate industry growth. And so those pressures are very, very high. Pink zones are slightly less populated, but also experiencing huge heat stress. And then the geographies that are further north in green are the regions in the world that are actually depopulating, actually shrinking in population, even as they become more livable over time. This is the intense irony, if you will, of the impact that climate change is having on our human geography wherever we may be in the world. And unfortunately at the COP summits, they're not really proposing solutions to this, because though I haven't put political borders on this map, note that it's very difficult to have a conversation about sovereignty and migration and mass migrations at a gathering of international political leaders, right? It's one of the key issues that is still held to be such a vital core part or component of sovereignty, is controlling one's borders against the movement of people. But you do see the demographic map changing as people relocate away from either geopolitical volatility due to labor shortages and needs, but also, of course, climate stress as well. And so when we think about anticipating demand, right, the demand for infrastructure, the demand for investment, the locations where new economic activity is going to emerge, we cannot make those maps and should not be making those investments without taking into account either what the needs are of people where they are, or where they're going to be in the future. And that brings me to the final point about geography generally as a whole. We've looked at maps of natural geography or climate geography. We've looked at political geography. We've looked at the functional geography of infrastructure and the human geography of potential migrations. And when you put it all together, you get a much more comprehensive picture of how the world actually works today, right? Look at the borders, the infrastructure, the natural resources, the demographics, all in one composite image, and appreciate that this is the world we have built, right? Not just those boring maps that hang in your office, which only have political borders, right? Not just the kind of green, brown, blue maps of the Earth that are on a globe. This is our living image, if you will, of human civilization as we've built it. And we haven't just built it, we have to change it. We have to change it, we have to modify it, we have to actively evolve it in light of all of the challenges we face today. Whether it is recalibrating supply chains and infrastructure investments because of new trade patterns, whether it is to absorb new movements of people, whether it is to place data centers in places where there's less water stress and higher renewable energy availability. Every time we build something, it should go on this map, and we should remember that we have to change, in a way, the way in which we've oriented the world. And that's really what the freight industry, the logistics industry, the transportation industry does all the time. It enables that active, dynamic remapping of the world, and that is our best response to volatility, right? To think about where we're going to have to invest in the future, where we're going to be in the future. And I think the previous panel ended on a very positive note by saying that, well, there aren't really a whole lot of concerns about Dubai, despite the fact that, of course, it's getting hotter here as it is everywhere, because this is one of the places that invests in adaptation. And that's something we all have to do. We have to adapt. So I hope that that's a positive note to close on as you carry on through this day and the next several days. I want to thank you for having me join you here, and I want to welcome Susanna back to reflect on the polls and surveys. Thank you. Oh, wait, should I go back? I don't want to give it away just yet.
Thank you very much, Parag. Really, really fascinating insights there. I'm sure you will all agree. Now, yes, as Parag has said, we are going to focus on the results of that poll, which you've been kindly filling out on the GFS app. So our question was, which factor do you believe will have the greatest impact on the future of global trade? So let me see if we can bring it up.
Was there a second ago? There we go.
Here we are. So take it away, Parag. What is the answer?
Well, very astute crowd, I think. So which factor will have the greatest impact on the future of global trade? Technological advancements, such as AI and blockchain, got the most votes, followed by geopolitical shifts. And you would think that those sort of militate in opposite directions, right? Geopolitics we think of as being divisive, and as I and others have spoken about, it's going to lead to more industrial policy, nearshoring, regionalism, and so forth. But AI and blockchain, on the other hand, make it lower the cost, lower transaction costs, enable greater efficiency, more transparency into trade. So the AI piece and the blockchain piece play a vital role. I think what's being referred to with AI as well is, of course, port management, right, within logistics in any given facility, blockchain too. So what we do know from economic literature is that it really is reducing transaction costs are part of what make globalization successful, because you can really have that complementarity, comparative advantage, supply meeting demand. So I think what we'll have is both A and B being true at the same time, and one hopefully offsetting the other.
Absolutely, and it's interesting to see that result, given, of course, all the headlines about a geopolitical fracture, but actually we're seizing on the opportunities that advancements in technology can bring. So let's move to our next question now, and again, kind of interesting, but not that unusual result that we have seen, really. How do you expect digital technologies to influence global trade? And the answer is?
So I think, again, it reflects the wisdom of the audience that these questions really are focused on technology and that you're very bullish on the technology. So enabling faster, more transparent transactions is really the key thing here. And in some ways, some of the other replies are subsets of that. At the end of the day, it is very much about transparency, efficiency. That's going to be really crucial. And I will add, because climate comes up a little bit, but this helps with the sustainability pressures as well. We can now monitor our emissions better. We can look at the ingredients in various supply chains and the dependencies, and really manage. We know how much waste there is in our supply chains for all commodities, food in particular.
But with the Internet of Things, it's certainly a game changer.
We know that IoT, sort of from farm to table, to use that analogy, right, is actually having a very important impact. So let's remember that. Let's think about technology not just enabling trade for the sake of trade, not just to offset the geopolitical risks, but also fundamentally it's going to make the industry, which is itself a major net contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, that much more environmentally friendly as well. So a very positive outlook here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Parag Khanna. It's been fascinating to have your insights. And thank you,
everyone,
for all of you for filling out that poll. It's really useful to get a big, wider perspective. So thank you very much, Parag. Thank you.